Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. As always, we have a great webinar on tap, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for our speaker, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can near the end of today's webinar. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is DevOps for Beginners, where to start learning and focusing. Our speaker today is Tim Beattie, who is the Global Head of Product at the Open Innovation Labs at Red Hat. Sorry about that, Tim. How are you? Great to see you.
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Good. No problem. I know you have a great presentation on tap, so I'm going to take myself off camera, put myself on mute, and let you get right into it.
Lovely. Thank you very much. So good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you may be watching or listening to this. Great to be here. My name, as Charlene said, is Tim Beattie. I'm the Global Head of Product for Red Hat Open Innovation Labs. And I'm here to talk a little bit about DevOps, and in particular, you know, where you might start learning about DevOps and where you might want to place some focus and interest in DevOps. So there's a picture of me and my contact details. I've been working at Red Hat for just under 3 years. My passion and interest is really in the world of agile practices, DevOps practices, continuous delivery practices, particularly focused on the cultural side of things, the people side of things, and how when you blend culture and people with process and technology, you get the real kind of energy and magic really starts to happen when you blend all of those together. And that's a lot of what we do with our customers at Open Innovation Labs. So in this session, my plan is to, first of all, kick off explaining my view, my take on what I see DevOps is, and you know, maybe more importantly, what it isn't. And I've got a few fun slides to share about that. Then I thought I'd maybe give you some tips on, you know, where you might get started and where you might want to sort of focus on. And as I go along, where I can, I'm going to share some stories of where I've applied DevOps for real and where we're using it with our customers, and tell a few stories and show a few photos as we go along. But let's kick off by introducing this term DevOps. And to help me do this, I've got a few sketches, and I'm going to do a shout out to my friend and colleague Ilaria Doria, who did these brilliant sketches for me recently. And I like to start a conversation on DevOps by talking about the value chain. And the value chain to me starts with a user or a customer or a business stakeholder. Someone that's got an idea, someone that's got a need, someone that's got something that wants to happen in this value chain, and that's kind of our trigger. And that's the beginning of our value chain. And at the end of the value chain, we have the actual value. And I'm Irish, so it's maybe not culturally insensitive to say value for me could be a pot of gold. The value for can mean different things for different people. It might be monetary, it might be to do with customer satisfaction, it might be to do with retention. Often it does have ultimately some kind of financial reward associated with it. And really this value chain is it's a list of stuff, it's a chain connecting those people, those customers, those users, those stakeholders at the beginning, and value being realized at the end. Now, I thought I'd maybe talk a little bit about traditional delivery, traditional software development, you know, where I remember seeing the value chain being slowed down. And I identified really a number of gaps or a number of holes in that value chain that we can plug, we can fill up. The first gap is really in getting the knowledge or getting the ideas or the information out of those stakeholders, out of those users, and into a list of requirements. And traditionally, this was a fairly lengthy business analyst exercise, capturing business requirement specs. And in traditional projects and programs, I recall these lists of things being endless, hundreds, thousands of business requirements, sometimes going on months and months, even years. I remember working with an insurance company where we celebrated signing off the business requirements after 2.5 years of working together. So it's quite a big gap to be plugged between, finding those people and capturing all of the requirements. But more recently, in more modern development processes, we have some really awesome collaborative practices that brings these people together, brings those business people and users together. So things like design thinking and human-centered design. Practices like impact mapping allows us to connect the impact and the outcome we want to have on those users and people with the features and the deliverables that we could go on to build to satisfy those needs or to provide those solutions. So that's our first gap. Our second gap is about how do we get the list of things, that big long list of things, built and delivered in a technology solution. And this is when our superheroes of the world, our developers and our testers, come into play. Now, in traditional software development, this was often a kind of a waterfall process where we take a signed off version of those list of requirements and we go through a period of designing a solution and maybe different levels of design and signing off against those so that we comply against a set of requirements. And only when that's signed off do we start writing code and delivering software artifacts. And when that's all finished and everyone's done their coding, then we start some testing. And then finally, we move towards deploying to production. So this stepped process was quite a long gap between getting those list of requirements that come from our business analysts and business users into a software artifact. But more recently, we've been using agile approaches. So agile frameworks such as Scrum and Kanban, and working in these sprints where we take a smaller number from that list in step one and deliver smaller increments of value so that we are delivering more iteratively and incrementally rather than in that big bang go live for all of the requirements. So Agile has really helped us plug that gap between lists of requirements and development and testing of those requirements. And then the third gap is then between the dev and test superheroes of this world and the operational people. They're the other superheroes of the world, the people that actually operate and maintain the platform and the software that runs on it. Now, traditionally, this would be a big handover. The dev team would do all of their development, testing, they package up the software, and they throw it over the metaphorical wall to a completely different set of people, the operators, who would then have to catch it. They've never seen it before, they don't know anything about it, and then that separate team would then have to deploy and maintain and run the applications in production. And of course, more recently, that wall's come down. And this is where this idea of DevOps comes from, that we bring the development and the operations together to work much more collaboratively. I'm going to talk a good bit more about that. So DevOps is really all about bringing down the wall, taking that wall away between development and operations and working in a much more collaborative, joined up way with a number of practices to support it. So for me, that value stream, that value chain, DevOps is all about optimizing, getting from the people on the left to the value on the right. And we do that through a really healthy balance of people, process, and technology. No one of these things alone will achieve DevOps greatness. It needs a nice, healthy tension on the support of people, process, and technology. So let's shift gears a little bit and let's talk a little bit about how we bring down that wall and what does DevOps actually look like. And I'm going to do another shout out to a colleague of mine, Donald Spring. Donald and I designed and run a DevOps culture and practice enablement program. It's a 5-day course, and we use a lot of this material in the course. So he's also a budding artist. His drawings probably aren't as good as Larry's, but they're pretty good at explaining the concept. So I borrowed them for this presentation. So we're going to talk about this kind of DevOps infinity loop, where everything's automated. So we start by taking the most valuable items on that list of things that we've captured from our users, from our business stakeholders, and we do a little bit of design, just enough design to pass into our development team, to our developers, who can build a full stack artifact of front end and middleware and back end to achieve that design and deliver that value. And then within the same team, we do some testing. We do some unit testing and we do some integration testing, and we might do some non-functional testing, but it's all automated. So we're actually doing the testing as quickly as we're writing the code. As soon as we're committing a few lines of code, we're running automated tests. And then we package up. Maybe we package up into a container, which is a great technology that allows us to deploy and operate really great DevOps. So we might package up into a container, and we pass into the ops side of the double loop, where we deploy maybe into a container platform such as Red Hat OpenShift. And deployment is interesting because when we talk about deployments and packaging up and putting these deployments onto target servers, it takes us out and allows us the opportunity to introduce these three really important concepts and practices that in the world of deployment. And they are continuous integration, where we are continuously building, continuously running the automated tests, unit tests and integration tests as developers check in code. And we encourage the practice of checking in code regularly, minutes, not waiting days and days, but when we have a little bit of value that we can commit, then we have a continuous integration server that is building and testing the code. Continuous delivery then is one step further, where as well as doing the continuous build and the continuous testing of unit tests and integration tests, we also do some kind of continuous acceptance tests. The kind of business acceptance criteria is being continuously tested upon every check-in. But we're not going to production. We're getting pretty close to production in a world of continuous delivery. Continuous deployment is where we do all of that, but we also, if the gates all pass, we go into production, and this is where we get into the world of doing tens, hundreds, even thousands of deployments every day that some of the modern companies today do. So deployment in a DevOps world is kind of really embracing those practices of continuous integration and continuous delivery, and maybe even continuous deployment. And then once we've deployed the software, then we're into a world of operating and monitoring the software. So monitoring from a technical perspective, but also monitoring from a business and a user behavior perspective, so that we are continuously learning about what's working, what's not working, patterns from users and adoption, getting some metrics from the technology, and that's informing the next most important thing that we do as we go around the cycle again of design, build, test, package, deploy, operate, monitor. So this is the DevOps loop, and hopefully start to explain what the world of DevOps feels like as we get into that infinite loop and go around it as quickly as we possibly can on the smallest chunks of value that's going to deliver value to our users and to our business. When I explain DevOps and talk about the loop and talk about the value chain, I also think it's sometimes worth talking about what DevOps is not. And there's a lot of anti-patterns out there I see often when I'm talking to customers, and I thought I'd maybe call out 6 of these today. So first of all, DevOps is not a one-man band. It is not, when you hear the term the DevOps engineer or even the DevOps team, that's a real anti-pattern. DevOps is something which is a part of everyone. Everyone from designing and development to testing and deployment and operations, even the business. It's something that's kind of a thread in the DNA of everybody involved in this kind of philosophy and this ideology, and absolutely not the responsibility of a unique individual or a unique set of individuals. It's kind of ingrained in everyone. DevOps is not just about the tools. Okay, so there are some great tools, and when you think of DevOps, you'll often think of things like Jenkins and GitHub and Ansible and OpenShift, which are great tools, and they've enabled us to work in this continuous integration, continuous delivery way. But it's absolutely not just about installing a load of tools and then expecting you to be working in a world of DevOps. A lot of this is around the mindset and the work approach and how the people interact with the tools and what they do when the tools give them information back. It's about setting up feedback loops between the technology and the people, and then using practices to respond to those feedback loops. So DevOps is not just about the tools. DevOps is not just about the cloud. You know, I know a lot of people think, you know, the DevOps is about, you know, moving your application development to cloud, and that is very popular. But DevOps can actually apply in lots of different environments, and often in Red Hat, we're working even on systems like mainframe systems, and applying DevOps and using containers on legacy systems like that. So it's absolutely a misconception to think that you know, DevOps is a cloud-only thing. DevOps is not a one-time thing. It's not a one-hit wonder. It's not something you do once and never do again, and never touch again, and never see again. So it's not, if you ever see on a project plan, you know, 3 weeks at the beginning to set up your DevOps and then you've ticked it and you're done. That's absolutely not DevOps. DevOps is something you continuously nurture, you continuously use, you continuously improve as you build more and more complexity into your applications. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get to a few examples shortly. DevOps is not about giving root access to all of your developers. You know, some people think, and they're quite right, we want to empower our teams, we want our developers to feel empowered and for them to be able to self-serve a lot of the things they previously had to, you know, maybe raise tickets or go to an infrastructure team, or lo and behold, a DevOps team to do for them. We want to remove those blockers and we want to empower the developers. We don't do that by just removing all security. What we do is we introduce lots of automation. We introduce lots of helper jobs. We provide lots of capability through information being available to the team, so that those teams are empowered and have access to proven processes that have been automated already in order to help them do their job and to be able to focus on more valuable things. And finally, you know, DevOps is not a silver bullet. It's not something you can come in and just install, or, you know, go and buy, you know, some capability to say, right, we're going to just you know, put DevOps in place and then that's going to fix, you know, all of our problems. You know, DevOps is very much a culture. DevOps is very much a mindset, and it needs a very much a focus from, yes, putting some technology in and making some technology change, but often also focuses around organizational change and changing some people and processes as well as we go along. So I mentioned a word there, and it was something that hadn't come up when I went round this loop. You know, it's great to be putting in a capability and tools to go round this loop as fast as we possibly can. But the thing that really is needed to make it successful is wrapping the whole thing in culture. And culture is such an important part to succeeding with DevOps approaches and strategies. And in fact, I love this quote from Thomas H. Davenport, who said, "It's easy to spend money on technology. It's somewhat more difficult to change a business process, but culture is the hardest." And he's absolutely right. Culture is a really hard thing to change. And that's where I really want to kind of focus the rest of this presentation, because doing DevOps is a journey, and it's something that people must want to take. It can't be imposed on them or passed down to them. It has to be something that everybody embraces and everybody rallies behind and everybody gets this infectious enthusiasm. And I love this photo. This is from one of my colleagues in Asia Pacific, working with a customer in Indonesia, and it's 80 plus individuals who are going through this DevOps journey. They started as one small team, 7 or 8 people, adopting a set of practices and moving towards continuous integration and continuous delivery. And they loved it, and they embraced it, and they really shared their passion about it. And other teams and other parts of the organization have now started to grab onto it. So they've really created that infectious enthusiasm, and that's culture. That's a really important component to get right if we're going to succeed and scale with DevOps. So with all of that in mind, I'd like to move to the next part of this presentation, which I'm calling Tim's Top 10 Tips to Transporting Towards True Terrific DevOps. So that's a lot of words beginning with T, apart from DevOps. And this was me, when I wrote this presentation, I thought, look, if I could look back at 10 things that have happened with my customers in the years that I've been helping them move towards DevOps, what would those top 10 tips be? So all of these come from customers of Red Hat Open Innovation Labs, where I work. Just to explain, Open Innovation Labs is all about open sourcing Red Hat's DNA to help accelerate application development. And our mission is to accelerate the delivery of our customers' ideas and creating that infectious enthusiasm so that they can build applications the way we build our applications. So it's very much enablement, and it's very much about using that DevOps culture and those DevOps practices in order to make that a reality. So my first tip, and we've already used the word automation a few times, but it sort of has to be top of the list, and that's automation through technology. And that's really around setting up an environment that makes those behaviors and that culture easy to work in, and a place you want to work in. And I often say, if somebody in your team is ever having to do the same task more than once, exactly the same task, it might be a deployment, or it might be installing a server, or it might be running a test. If they ever do the same thing more than once, it's a candidate for automation. Why are we asking a human to do the same thing over and over and over again? Yeah, we have technology that allows us to do that. In Open Innovation Labs, we have a huge kit bag of automation that ranges from a push button infrastructure that allows us to spin up our continuous integration and continuous delivery pipelines on top of a container platform. We have an increasing number of assets that allow us to basically get products and software into our clusters, and it's all done through automation. So we don't have to unpick little manual errors. We don't have to worry about infrastructure falling over. If we do, we just press play again, and we have all of that automation to support us. It's such an important foundation for us to build on top on, and prevents us and mitigates us from hitting things like technical debt, which will ultimately slow us down when we start to deliver business value. So through automation, we want to be able to get hands on keyboards, write code, deliver business value from day one of working together as a product development team. My second tip is all around collaboration, and again, it's to get rid of that idea of the DevOps guy, or the hero developer, or the unicorn developer, the one person who has all of this great knowledge about how to do this amazing stuff inside their head. We in our teams, we often have a catchphrase that say we like to pair to program, mob to learn, or mob to learn, pair to build. And this is this kind of idea that we work in small groups of people, and we have lots of collaboration and conversation, shared understanding of everything from the business value of features being delivered, to the processes that we go through when we are developing solutions, to how we operate the solution, and some of the operations capability around that. So the importance of day-to-day collaboration and using practices like pair programming and mob programming really help get that shared ownership the entire DevOps solution. My third tip is all around inclusivity. And thinking back to that picture of the 70-30 developers, this is all around, not keeping this amazing greatness of automation and the ways of working within the realms of one team, but sharing it and showcasing, tell the world, show the world, I often say. And some of the ways we do this are through practices like walk the walls. So, bring in people who might be interested in this, bring in other teams who might want to see this way of working, inspire them, bring in executives, show them, explain the value of investing in this kind of infrastructure and way of working. Sprint reviews is a great opportunity when we do these weekly or fortnightly demos of the new features we've built into software. Let's also demonstrate all of the infrastructure and the continuous delivery capability that we're putting in place, and let's show the world what DevOps is really all about, and let's show it in a very visual way. And that allows us to feel a bit more comfortable about embracing experimentation. Because we've got all of this automation and we're working in these shorter cycles, we can feel safe to try things out, or maybe even A/B test something and try a few different unknowns out to learn from customers and to learn from behaviors. And this technology really, and this approach and this ways of working and the mindset really allows us to go down that path of embracing experimentation. My fourth tip is all around transparency. And this is not letting information held within this technology and the tools and the practices, not keeping it stored away where people can't see it, but keeping them up on big walls like this. Or if we're using CI/CD and test automation and things like that, let's have big dashboards where we're radiating this information, and the developers and all of the people who might be interested are getting that real-time information, and lights are changing color when things start to change, so we're getting that really rapid feedback. So we have this term information radiators, because they're artifacts, either digital or physical, that just give information. They emit information. They trigger interest, and people can have conversations about it. People can learn about what this team are doing, or the health of the application, or the health of the team, or the roadmap for what's happening next with the team and the product. And information radiators are key to doing that. And my fifth tip is around processes and practices, and I've mentioned a few in the lead up to this. I've talked about things like impact mapping, and I've talked about things like continuous integration and infrastructure as code, everything as code. We in Open Innovation Labs, we don't prescribe one framework or one methodology, but what we do actively support is an open source community practice repository called the Open Practice Library. And this is a growing set of practices that we use, and many of them we've contributed to, and we kickstarted this site. But it's also completely open source and community driven, so anybody can contribute the practices and tools that they use. And it's built around practices that help with discovery, continuous discovery, practices that help with delivery and continuous delivery, and how we pivot between those two through options. And we also have this foundation. So the foundation is a set of practices that are cultural and focused on facilitating collaboration, and also technical and engineering practices that help enable, on this loop above, which is called the Mobius loop, enables teams to move around the Mobius loop as quick as possible. So I would really encourage people to explore different practices, see these as a huge, big toolkit, and you're opening your toolbox and exploring what practices may help drive a culture of continuous discovery and continuous delivery, and allow the practices to emerge based on what works well, what doesn't work so well, and what you've tried and what you might want to try in the future. My sixth tip then is all around adaptability. One of my favorite practices, which you can read about in the Open Practice Library, are called retrospectives. And this is kind of like the the lessons learned exercise that you used to do at the very end of big long projects, and you think about what are all of the things we would do differently if we were to go back to the beginning and start again. Well, we do these as we go along. We do them fortnightly, and if we're using 2-week sprints, or maybe even weekly, or maybe even we have what's called a real-time retrospective, which is a very similar practice. And it allows us to continuously learn. It allows us to take a step back from delivering the next feature and think, look, what's working well for us and what's not working so well for us? How can we make ourselves better? So it's really facilitating this idea of continuous improvement and inspection and adaptation. And I think back to the teams that I've worked with, and I thought, when we talk about DevOps and things like CI/CD and all of the great data we can get from the tools and the technology that helps with CI/CD, if we bring that data to retrospectives, and when we've done that, some of the very best ideas that my teams have come up with and how to make themselves better, it's happened during retrospectives. So retrospectives might be, just in the corner of your office, or it might be down at a pub. I'm a big fan of a pub retrospective personally, where we take the team offside and we just take a bit of time to think about how are we going, let's inspect what we've done, and let's think about how we're going to adapt to make ourselves even better. And there's tons of fun ways to do that. Tip number 7 then is all around visualization, and with particular focus on metrics. One of the practices that I absolutely love to use with my customers is called metrics-based process mapping. It's a practice similar to value stream mapping that some of you may be familiar with. You can read about these in the Open Practice Library. But really, this practice here is about visualizing all of these things that happen inside an organization between a business asking for a new feature or an improvement in some software, and that feature or improvement being available in production and being utilized by customers. Now, in this picture, which is a little bit blurry, but it's from one of my customers from a couple of years ago. All of those pink sticky notes, they are things that have to happen between those two stage gates. Now, you can see there's lots of different swim lanes, lots of different lines, and there's a yellow piece of tape between each swim lane. Every time we cross a swim lane, a yellow line, we are actually handing over to a different part of the organization. So in this case, there was a technical service ops department, and there was an Oracle ops department, and there was a configuration management department, and there was a business area, and then there was a development capability, and then there was an operational support area. And in order to get fresh ideas from the business all the way into production, we had to hand off to different parts of the organization at different times. On those pink stickies, you can't read them, but we capture some really interesting metrics around, how long does it actually take to do the thing on that pink sticky note, and how long does it take between the previous pink sticky note finishing and the next pink sticky note starting. And the really interesting thing is, when you cross a yellow line, we tended to find there were huge delays, because often you're having to raise a ticket, or you're having to log on to some other system and say, I want to book some person to work on this, or some resource. And the metrics just really stand out as being very, very wasteful. And in this particular case, I think they were doing 1 or 2 releases of software per year, and it was taking 7, 8, 9 months to get a release out, no matter how small or big, because of all of those handoffs and handovers. And it's visualized. It just really stands out when you can put it up on a wall like this, and bring people in to validate and also have a conversation around it. So really great to visualize the process and capture some metrics before we move into a world of DevOps. And then linked to that, it's great to visualize and capture the metrics after. So above the red line here in this picture is basically how this world looked after we put in place a cross-functional product team, after we put in place the technology to provide continuous delivery, and after we've moved to a more DevOps way of working. Now you can see it's all on one horizontal line, so there's no handovers, because we have now got design people, we've got infrastructure people, we've got development people, we've got QA people, we've got the people who are operating in the team. So we have a true DevOps team without all of those handovers. And the green line that's beneath about 2/3 of these tasks, these items, that represents automation. So these are all of the things that we've managed to automate during the 6 weeks, in this case, that we worked with this customer to put this way of working in place. And when we total up all of the metrics before and after, really interesting to think about, well, what's the lead time in delivering new features to production? What's the cycle time? How complete and accurate are each of these things that used to happen before? And how complete and accurate are they now? How much rework is been needing to be done as a result of there being automation that reduces significantly. So linked to that then is when you capture metrics and visualize the world before and the world after, and you can see the differences, you must celebrate the metrics-based improvements. You must tell the world about them, because when you prove this, even with just one application and one team to start with, you can get some real amazing headline figures. In this case, the total lead time from an idea to delivery, first delivery to users, used to be 38 weeks, now 7 weeks. Yeah, amazing. A critical bug fix, okay, used to take 10 hours, which is pretty good, yeah, okay, because it's critical and everyone drops what they're doing. New way of working, 30 minutes, and that was with full automated regression testing and full trusted release process because of all of the automation that's in there. So really amazing to celebrate these metrics-based improvement and tell the world. And the final tip, and it's linked to all of these, is actually, before I go there, the really interesting thing about that customer that had those metrics. I checked in a few months ago just to hear about what had happened since they kind of kickstarted this way of working, and they still celebrate the metrics-based improvement. They're still telling the world about it. So live in production in 89 markets, continue to push code to production on more or less a daily basis. Record at the moment is 3 deploys in 2 hours. The pipeline execution time is about 20 minutes with a whopping total of 128 test cases. So it's like, really proud of those metrics base and continuously wanting to get better and continuously improving as that team lives on and stays together. So linked to all of that then is you must celebrate as a team. You must, there's a shared culture and passion that is invested into all of this. You can kind of feel the energy in the team, and it's brought together by all of those things: that visualization, that information radiation, those retrospectives, continuous improvement, the taking of metrics, and being able to celebrate and tell the world about it. So celebrating is something that we absolutely must not forget to do. And as we deliver early, deliver often, deliver regularly, we should celebrate often and regularly as well. So that's all I wanted to say. I hope that's been useful to introduce my perspective on DevOps and what it means to me, and some of the tips that I've kind of come up with in my kit bag from applying it with teams globally around the world. Would love to hear and take any questions people might have, and we'll pass back to Charlene to pass on any questions.
Excellent. Well, we've gotten some great questions in so far, but there is time. If you have a question for Tim, please go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your questions. Let's go ahead and dive right on in. First question: since folks can't collaborate together right now, I guess because of the pandemic, like in many of the photos you shared, how is the lab's practice virtual?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, you're quite right. You probably picked up from a lot of my tips. It's all around collaboration and conversation and that culture, which is brilliant when you're in the room together.
Right.
And in fact, 4 or 5 months ago, as the COVID-19 pandemic was becoming real, we in Open Innovation Labs, we have to pivot ourselves. It's something we say to our customers: things change all the time. So the residency, which is the product that we sell to our customers, was no longer going to work because we couldn't get everyone into the room. And actually, we've since been running what we call the virtual residency. There's a couple of things which have worked really well for us. One is open source as a philosophy, as a set of principles, have really helped us continue this way of working with our customer teams. If you think about it, open source teams, which open source software has been running for decades, and the nature of open source is highly distributed. Your teams are from all over the world. Often they've never even met each other, yet they all contribute to the same products, the same software. So a lot of the ways of working that open source teams have around contribution to code, around pull requesting code, merging code, has really almost been emphasized when more and more people have had to work distributed. So open source practices are definitely a good thing. The other thing I would say is, I think all of the practices that I've talked about and all of them in the open practice library, you can do them distributed. We're fortunate that there are many great tools out there, digital tools. So there are tools that will emulate everything that we do on a wall or with sticky notes or on a big dashboard. And it takes a bit of getting used to and learning the tools, but tools like Miro and Mural, things like Jira, Confluence, Slack, many of these are software as a service tools and really easy to get hold of and try out and experiment with. And we found, because we had to pivot several of our engagements and move them into virtual mode, we kind of learned in production ourselves by using these tools, trying them out, figuring out what works, applying a lot of the great practices that we do with our software, but with our ways of working as well.
Excellent. Okay. Next question. Let's see. Oh, here's a good one. How do I get the executive team to embrace DevOps? We're security and risk averse.
Okay. Yeah, very good question. So I think this is really where the whole, let's show and not tell. So when you've got executives who maybe have got differing views about what DevOps is or the value of it, let's be very transparent and show it. And the best way I've done that is by bringing, and this is in a physical world, but you can do it with the digital tools as well, bringing executives through all of these artifacts, all of these information radiators, doing a walk the walls with them, and just having a very open discussion about what these tools are doing, what these practices are doing, why we use them, and the value that they bring. So I think the visualization and the walk the walls and just being able to bring those stakeholders into the conversation early and showing them, and I often say, tell the world, show the world regularly. Share the outcomes and the outputs of sprint reviews to anyone who might be interested or may have challenging concerns about this. Working transparently really helps. The security and the risk thing is really interesting because to me, security is at the forefront of all of this. That building in security into DevOps pipelines, CI/CD pipelines, actually mitigates the risk, because we're thinking about, well, what are all of the things which might go wrong in the future when we try to release this to production? What are all the vulnerabilities or the attacks, or when we scan things just before we go live? Why are we waiting until the end to do that? Let's build that into the process up front. And then every little small change we make, let's validate that through automation. So I think being able to build in some of those non-functional and risky things and talking to those stakeholders so that we are doing the work early to build that into the pipelines can really get those stakeholders on board. And again, we can visualize and prove through metrics as well the value of doing that.
All right, great. Just a reminder, there's plenty of time for question and answer. So if you have a question for Tim, go ahead and use your GoToWebinar control panel and submit your question. Here's the next one coming at you. Do you have an example of a CI/CD failure and how to overcome it?
Yeah, well, okay, so that's another good question. So when people ask me, can this whole way of working fail? I often say, this is if you set the system of work up correctly, it can't fail because you're injecting continuous improvement. If you're putting things like retrospectives and you're setting up your whole ecosystem to be based around the idea of continuous learning and continuous improvement and inspection and adaptation, you have to get better as you're going along. So it might not be great at first. In fact, often when we start working on legacy systems, it can be very, very challenging. But we put a line in the sand and we say, right, that's where we are today. Let's start to put continuous improvement in place. An example I often show when I'm teaching this material is it's a real chart that I captured about 12, 13 years ago using a tool called Hudson, which kind of predated Jenkins for a lot of CI people that use CI, continuous integration. And it was a build chart over, I think, about 13 two-week sprints. I was working for a telecoms company at the time, and we were building a new business process management system over 13 two-week sprints. And this chart shows the length of time the build took every time it ran in minutes. And then the color on the chart, the color would show whether the build succeeded, whether some of the automated tests failed, or whether the build failed completely. So it was blue, yellow, or red. So red meant the build had failed, yellow meant the build had passed, but some of the tests had failed, and blue meant the build had been successful. Now, I remember this because when you look at the chart, the first on the left-hand side, the first kind of 20, 30 builds, they were all red. The build was completely failing all of the time. This was sprint one. And I remember we went to a retrospective at the sprint one, and the whole team looked at this and we thought, this isn't very good because we're not getting any feedback from our code being committed. What can we do about this? And we took a retrospective action at the end of sprint one to investigate why and see if we could address that. And during sprint two, we did that. And if you look at the next part of the timeline, you see lots of blue builds, some yellow builds, but they were very long. They were taking 20, 25 plus minutes. So we got to the end of sprint two and we went to another retrospective and we said, great news. That was well worth investing the time of this person to go and figure out why the build was failing. It seems to be working, but it's taken a long time, and that's not a very fast feedback loop. So can we take another retrospective action to improve? And we did. And if you look at the rest of the chart from sprint 3 all the way through to sprint 11, they're mostly blue or yellow. There's occasional red, but they're all 2 or 3, 4 minutes. And I often think, at the beginning of that, you could say CI/CD was failing. It just wasn't doing anything good for us. And I often think if we hadn't done those retrospectives, if we just let that debt accumulate, how much time would have been lost over the course of the 22 weeks? So having retrospectives and continuous improvements is something that really, really helps here.
All right, great. So quick time check, we have about 12 minutes to the top of the hour. So I think we have time for maybe 2 or 3 more questions here. Let's see, here's a good one. How do we select the right tools for DevOps, or where do we start our tool selection?
Okay, cool. So I really encourage experimentation here, and I love to empower the teams. I know this isn't always possible, but where we can avoid telling teams you must use these tools and only these tools and no other tools, and actually encourage teams to get out there and try different tools. I think you'll find teams are happier to use tools that they have that they really want to use. Now that's not to say we don't have opinions. We have some strong opinions, but we hold them sometimes weakly because we encourage people to try new ones, especially as so many new tools are coming out. I think what's great today around tooling is it's really easy to spin them up. Automation is our friend here, so we can, spin up things. There's a great technology at the moment around code-ready workspaces, which allows us to have basically our entire development cloud containerized and run in the cloud. So it's a really good way that you can safely try out, different tools in there as well. So again, it's back to the inspect and adapt. I recommend lots of learning and lots of trying things out and lots of sharing across the teams and beyond teams as well. And the best tools will always win.
All right, excellent. So let's see, so many really great questions have come in. Here's another good one for you. Can you talk a bit more about metrics, and when you're starting DevOps, how do you measure success?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit, so I'm a big fan of metrics, and I talked a bit about that metrics-based process mapping practice, which I really recommend checking out on the Open Practice Library. I'm a big fan of the Accelerate book by Jez Humble, Gene Kim, Nicole Forsgren, and the whole State of DevOps work that they did. So they came up with 4 metrics, and one is around lead time, which is tightly coupled with what I talked about in the presentation. One is around frequency of deployments. Increasing the frequency of deployment is a good thing. One is around the mean time to recover. How long does it take us to recover when something goes wrong? Because that will continue to happen. And then another one around also around failure. And I think these are metrics which are great to take now at any time. Even if you're not using any DevOps or you're really early on in this journey, can we capture those 4 metrics that are outlined in the Accelerate book? And then can we take them regularly as we go along, as we start to introduce new technology or new practices or change the organization of people to different ways? Can we then see the impact that is having? Because I think those 4 metrics really then have an impact on metrics that are more business related. So, for a company's products, things like NPS, the Net Promoter Score, or customer satisfaction around a product, or even the employee satisfaction. I suspect that when we are improving our software delivery metrics, we then improve those product metrics, which ultimately will impact the metrics on the success of the organization as a whole. So I think these things are all connected, but starting with those 4 is a really good starting point.
Excellent. Okay. Let's see. I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll close out the question and answer period. How do you resolve conflicts between dev and ops? That is the age-old question.
Simple. You bring them together. So you start
and lock the door, right?
yeah. Bring them in, lock the door, keep them together. No, I mean that is ultimately that at a high level. That this is all about bringing dev and ops together. That's easier said than done for some. I think some of the practices that I have seen work really well when we kickstart a new team, a new product team that are going to use DevOps. One of the practices we always start with is called the social contract. And this is about codifying the behaviors between all of the people in this team. And it's a living, breathing artifact, and it's very publicly displayed on the wall or in the digital tool if we're virtual. And I actually find when I use this, it sort of sets us up really well to be sensitive of the behaviors, and we can improve the social contract as we learn more about each other, and retrospectives are a great form for doing that. Pairing and mobbing, I talked a bit about in the presentation. So great opportunity is to pair up, maybe someone who has historically been pure development and someone who has been purely operations, and now we're going to pair. Well, let's pair together and suddenly, the developer is seeing things through the eyes of the operator, and we're thinking about, operations first, and vice versa. We're starting to have empathy between, ops and dev by working together. Another really useful tool, practice, is called the definition of done. So when we are done with an item, a feature or a piece of development, what are all of the things that we will have done, and having, people from operations and people from development traditionally involved in co-writing the definition of done can really get us onto the same page. So there are a few practices, but the culture is the thing that really is the thing you need to wrap it up in. And working in a space where we feel like we're tightly connected as one team, and the shared passion and shared energy and shared focus on the business outcomes is the real key to success there.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we are about 4 minutes to the top of the hour, so unfortunately that's all the time that we have for question and answer period. We had such really great questions come in. If we didn't get to your question, I apologize, but please know that the folks at Red Hat will be getting a copy of all of the questions that came in, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to follow up with you offline to make sure your question gets answered. Also, just a quick reminder that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of the event, or if you just want to watch it again, you'll have the opportunity to do so. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the DevOps.com website, so you can always go look for it there. Just go to DevOps.com/webinars, look in the on-demand section, and it should be right there waiting for you. And while you're there, please check out some of the other webinars that we have, both upcoming and on demand. Hopefully there'll be one or two that pique your interest. Tim, thank you very much. Such a great presentation. I was just loving your slides. So lots of great information, and I am sure everybody on this webinar got a lot out of it. So appreciate your time, appreciate your expertise.
Thank you.
Also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody. Please stay safe.